My name is Chris Ruane. I'm the Member of Parliament for the Vale of Clwyd constituency in North Wales in the UK. And before I was a Member of Parliament for 18 years. But prior to that, I was a teacher in a primary school for 15 years. It was the same primary school I went to when I was 3. I was a Billy Backwater. So in 1987, the school was being inspected by Her Majesty's Inspectorate, and the staff got the jitters. So the head teacher brought in the school nurse, and she taught meditation, not mindfulness, meditation to the whole school. So that's the head, the staff, the janitor, the cooks, and I participated, and it was tension and release throughout the body. It was a body scan, not so much on the breath or the philosophy of mindfulness. And it worked for me. So I then started using it with the 10-year-old children in my class. And in those days, back in the 1980s, there were 39 children in my class. I had to herd them round and shepherd them. And I used meditation with some visualization. I was aware of Ignatius Loyola, his visualizations. And I used the breath and meditation with some visualizations to help me in the classroom. So the children would come in from playtime, and it would be wet and windy, and they would all be up in the air. I would sit them down, and just 2 minutes of meditation would allow them to focus and gain their attention. And I also used it in creative writing. I used it it was a Roman Catholic school. I used it and I used to take the assemblies. So there wouldn't be 39 children, there would be 300 children. And I would settle them down with meditation. I would then tell a story from the Bible, and I would ask them to put themselves there, to feel their feet on the hot sands of Lake Galilee, to hear the flapping of the sails, to feel the wind on their face. And by actually putting those children in the story themselves, the responses that came from them were tremendous. So I started using it in the art appreciation. I would use it in gym to give them better body control. I would use it after football to relax them. And the day finished at 3 o'clock. Football was from 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock. I would relax them. They would be walking out of school like this. And the parents would be saying, "What have you done to my child? He's all calm and relaxed." So those children now are in there. In fact, it includes my niece, who is now 37. And she's gone on herself, and others have gone on to practice mindfulness. So that was my introduction to meditation. My actual introduction to mindfulness was through my daughter, who's now 22 and just started a career as a primary school teacher following her father. And 11 years ago, she was doing comparative religions. And I'd had my meditation experience, and I came across Buddhism. I thought I knew a lot about Buddhism. I didn't. I didn't realize the centrality of mindfulness to Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist practice. And I started to download podcasts from Gil Fronsdal from Spirit Rock in California. And Gil, I think he's Norwegian born, so he has a Scandinavian background, and he helped to set up Spirit Rock, and I downloaded 300 of his podcasts. And on the train down to London, and on the train back to Wales, I would listen to these podcasts, and I would practice the meditations, and I would listen to the Dharma talks, and the whole of the philosophy opened up to me. And I had this practice for about 5 years, and then in about 2013, I decided to take this practice to Parliament. It had worked, mindfulness had worked for me, and I knew that there were 650 stressed MPs. They'd gone through the expenses crisis, or the expenses scandal in 2009. I'm not sure if you recall that. Other countries have gone through it since, where MPs were highly stressed. So I took back mindfulness to the MPs, and I decided to take it to Parliament, as I said. Now there's a picture of Parliament, and there's a picture of Parliament in a snow bubble. I think you know that. You shake it, and the snow comes up, and after a while, it settles. And we all live in our own personal bubbles. Some have bigger bubbles than others. And quite often we live in institutional bubbles. There's groupthink. You tend to think about what the institution thinks about. You don't reach out. So I decided to take mindfulness to Parliament, and I looked for the best person to help me to do that. I was a primary school teacher, I was a scientist, I was an academic, I'm practicing Catholic, but I didn't have any great contemplative tradition from the Eastern traditions. So I approached a man called Professor Richard Layard, who is a professor at the London School of Economics, and he wrote the book Happiness, A New Science, and also The Good Childhood. And he not only was he a professor, he was a Labour Lord in the House of Lords. I was in the House of Commons, down one end of, down this end of Parliament. He was in the House of Lords, down that end of Parliament. So I approached Richard. I didn't know him, but he was very enthusiastic, and I knew he would be well connected, and he was. He approached Professor Mark Williams from the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. Mark, as has been explained, I think, by Lorna there, was one of three scientists, Mark Williams, Zindel Ziegel, and John Teasdale, who, in cooperation with John Kabat-Zinn, researched the science for mindfulness and repeat episode depression. And that science was accepted by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence in 2004. The research was confirmed in 2007 and 2009. So this was copper-bottomed research, and repeat episode depression 3 times or more. So the worst kind of depression had the best response from mindfulness. So Mark came down with Chris Cullen, an inspirational teacher, and in 2012, June 2012, and we planned for 6 months, and then in January 2013, we set up the first mindfulness practice in the United Kingdom Parliament. And there were 22 MPs, and I wanted to do it on a cross-party basis. I'm a Labour MP. I didn't want it to be done as a Labour initiative on a cross-party basis. And we followed Mark Williams's book, Peace in a Frantic World, which obviously it's mindfulness, it's the importance of the breath and the body, and mindfulness of thought, mindful movement. We followed over an 8-week course. We followed his book, and he had a lovely way of presenting it to MPs. He used his arms. He said, if this is your mind and this is your body, then the body is in the present moment, but your mind is drawn back to the past, quite often to bad things that happen to you, and you ruminate and you stay there. So whatever is in the present is not fully there for you. Some people, he said, live their lives like that. Their body in the present moment, but their mind in the future, planning where they've got to be, what they've got to do. And again, missing out on what is in front of you. So by using the breath and the body as an anchor, you are able to take, and in the same plane at the same time, you are able to take in what is before you, whether that's your baby's face, a beautiful sunset, a difficult problem. And lots of MPs were able to relate to that. In his book, Peace in a Frantic World, which I don't think it's been out of the Amazon Top 100 in the United Kingdom since it was printed, I think, in 2010. It's been in the top 100. I think it's 1 in every 20 homes in the United Kingdom has got a copy of this book. And there were not only the breath, but a philosophy of living. And every week in our parliamentary practice now, we start with gratitude. And for the past 6 years, I've been keeping a gratitude diary. And I'm sure you've heard the statistic before, that your negative thoughts are 7 times stickier than your positive thoughts. And by keeping a gratitude diary, you were able to, I think, rebalance that ratio. And in my gratitude diary, I don't think about my possessions. Every now and again I give thanks for financial security. I don't want to downplay that, it is very, very important. But I try to look beyond for the gratitude that I feel. And gratitude for nature. And like Saki said yesterday, when you go through the park, you notice light, sideways light on different trees. You notice the beautiful ivy outside. I give gratitude for my health. I've got good physical and mental health, but I don't take it for granted. I give gratitude for my relationships with my family, with my friends. I give gratitude when I'm walking through London for the built environment, for the sewer systems, for the tube that gets us from A to B very quickly, and what used to be very safely, perhaps is no longer so. I give gratitude for the arts and the books that I read, inspirational TED Talks. I also, and I've been trying lately with this, giving gratitude for bad experiences if I've learnt from them. So gratitude has been central, and we were taught gratitude by Mark Williams. In fact, I'd started practicing gratitude before Mark's lessons in Parliament. I read a book by Robert Eamons called Thanks, and it's had a tremendous effect on me. So the other things that we looked at were habits. In Mark's book, he said, just to break a small habit, just try and stay off caffeine for a week and see how you go. Try staying off chocolate for a week. When you go out of your door in the morning to walk to work, try going via another route. Just these little breaking of habits. And I tried that. I also tried giving up alcohol. We have a dry January in the UK, and I found it quite easy. I then, for the first year, the second year I did dry January and Lent, so that was 3 months off the alcohol. And now I practice that every year. I've given up chocolate. I reduce my caffeine. So these little habits, when you break them, I think it was Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. So there are good habits, which we should keep, and there are bad habits, which we should break. In Mark's lessons, we learnt about nourishment and depletion. There are activities in your life, in my life, that nourish us. There are activities that deplete us. And if you think of a time of crisis, a time of stress, what happens to those two lists? The nourishment reduces, and the depletion increases. So there's a vortex. It starts up here, a big wide circle, we're in balance, and then we get stressed, so we throw out the nourishing activities, so we get more depleted, so we throw out more, until we end up in crisis. So I often take stock of my nourishment and my depletion, and I make sure, even in crisis, that I go out for a walk. I take the kids out, I take my wife out. We also learned, and for me, I'm quite hyperactive. My sister believes I've got ADD, and now she's explained that to me 2 weeks ago. The more I think about it, I think she might be right. But I am hyperactive. I am usually very, very noisy. But with these lessons in Parliament, we learn to sit in silence. Most of the early lessons were taught and guided meditations. Now we sit on a Tuesday afternoon at 5:30 till 6 o'clock, mostly in silence. And as Blaise Pascal said, all human evil comes from a single cause, man's inability to sit still in a room. And in this 24/7 society, it is very, very difficult to sit still and to be at ease with ourselves. So these are some of the quotes from some of the MPs that attended the course. I've also got some quotes which are not here from the Dutch Parliament, from the members of Parliament there. So the quotes are there, and as you can see, these are gifts of the mind that have been given to MPs. And these gifts include perspective, appreciation, gratitude, presence. Some make reference to a life of service, focus and concentration, all important soft skills that were mentioned yesterday by Saki. Many of these are on the list from MPs. So, this was the slide that was on there before. I left it on because it's the most wordy slide. I thought you could take it in. Some even claim that it's changed their relationship with other MPs in Parliament. It's transformational with their relationships. When you meditate with a person, it's hard to be nasty to them afterwards. When people are prepared to show their vulnerability, are prepared to fall in front of you, it's difficult to have a go at them. So these are some of the quotes from Tracy Crouch. Now, Tracy, there were 4 members of Parliament who came out about their mental illness in one debate. And Tracy was one of them. She then went on to Radio 4 on Woman's Hour and spoke of her depression and how she was on antidepressants, which balanced her. She was grateful for them, but she wanted something better than that. And she tried mindfulness. I used to write tonight 850 Lords and 650 MPs saying, do you want to come along to our course? And Tracy came along and she sampled mindfulness, and it worked for her. It doesn't work for everybody. I stressed that from the outset with MPs. And I also pitch mindfulness to MPs in the tea rooms over a cup of tea as rebalancing for some. And some need it in a clinical setting. And that's why it's important to have expert trained teachers like Mark Williams and Chris Cullen. But I don't pitch mindfulness as just a clinical intervention. I think in the well-being curve, the people below the curve definitely need it. Whatever that is in different countries, 20, 30%, 15% in some. But there's a whole bell curve here of people who are quite well and some that are even flourishing. And I think the job of mindfulness, is to shift that whole bell curve along. So the biggest beneficiaries are the people below the bell curve, but everybody benefits. I think mindfulness can help achieve a flourishing society. So we had the lessons in Parliament, and they were a success. Over the past 4.5 years, we've had 150 members of Parliament who've had training. Members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords. Chris Cullen is a very generous man. He comes down from Oxford on a Tuesday. At 1 o'clock, he teaches MP staff. And there's 250 of those that have benefited from Chris's lectures and Chris's practice, mindfulness practice. And what's important is that those 250, the biggest pool of future MPs is from researchers. So David Cameron, Ed Miliband, David Miliband, leaders of our political parties, all started off as researchers. So we have sown the seeds of mindfulness in government and in Parliament. There's also, on a separate but parallel initiative, 3,000 senior civil servants have been introduced to mindfulness by one woman, Marion Furr, a senior civil servant in the Department of Health. The Department of Health employs 1.3 million people in the United Kingdom, and the central department has 2,000 civil servants, And she personally introduced mindfulness to 1,000 of those senior civil servants, hoping that it would cascade through the whole Department of Health for those 1.3 million people who work there, but also in terms of policy and research. So, other MPs have spoken about how mindfulness has benefited them. Just give you a little story, a little aside. John Kabat-Zinn has been mentioned. He came to Parliament in 2013, and I've got to be honest, it wasn't me who got him into Parliament, into Downing Street. It was Professor Richard Layard, who's highly respected, and Professor Mark Williams, who's highly respected. I unfortunately wasn't highly respected by the Conservative Prime Minister, so I wish I was. So John came over, and I took him for dinner in Parliament, and he could see my enthusiasm for it. He said, "Slow down, Chris, slow down. This is a 1,000-year project." Now at the time I thought, oh no, I'm going to be 1,054 when he finishes. That was one bit of advice, and it was sound advice. The second bit of advice was to work on your parachute before you need to open it. And I say this to my kids, I say it to everybody I come across, every lecture or that I give on mindfulness. So I was an MP for 18 years, and 2 years ago I lost my seat. It's a democracy. The people had spoken, the bastards. The people had spoken, I had lost my seat, and that's the way democracy works. So I lost my seat. And John Kabat-Zinn emailed me, and he said, "Chris, sorry to see you go. You've done great work in Parliament. How's it going?" So I said to John, I've worked on my parachute, I've opened my parachute, and it works. So my advice to you all today is work on your parachute before you need to open it. So that's my personal story on mindfulness. And I'm going to take a few, what's the time now? I'm going to take a few questions on this section, and then we'll have a tea break, we'll have a bathroom break, and then perhaps I'll go on to my second part of the speech, which is about how we've taken mindfulness around the world to other parliaments and what we've learned from people during that process. So if there's any question you've got to ask me on this part of the speech, please feel free to do so.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm Mark. I'd like to hear, are you in dialogue with the Danish politicians?
Could you use the microphone? Is there a microphone? Yes, I think there is. Behind you.
Yeah, I'm Mark. Does it work?
No. That's it.
Yeah, I'm Mark. And
I'm Mark.
Nice to hear you speak. I'd like to know, are you in dialogue with some Danish politicians to get this introduced in Denmark?
Right. Now.
And if so, how's it been met?
Right, now that's a great question. Am I in dialogue with Danish politicians about introducing it to the Danish Parliament? Now, I'll answer that quickly. It's going to be the subject of a panel discussion this afternoon, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, because that issue of how do we introduce, if you want, or if they want, mindfulness into the Danish Parliament. We'll answer that between 3 and 4 this afternoon. But the answer is I have contacted one Danish MP who was interested, but I think is a little bit busy at the time, but he could be out into the Danish Parliament. So there's a quick answer on that. So if you could leave the questions about the Danish Parliament, perhaps I'm going to do the international part of my work after the toilet break, and I'll answer some questions on that. But the meaty stuff of how you helped to establish mindfulness in your Danish Parliament. We'll cover this afternoon. So any other questions on what I've covered?
Question over here. Hi, Tamjidi. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I'm very much interested in implementing mindfulness into the schools, and I'm interested in hearing what is the process from introducing this into the British Parliament to actually seeing mindfulness more at schools in the UK?
That's a great question. Mindfulness in schools. Now, there are many curriculum around the world for introducing mindfulness into schools, but none, and there's been much research on this, I've been told that there's been nothing that's absolutely concrete, copper-bottomed research to conclusively prove that mindfulness benefits children. I believe it. I taught meditation, and I know the impact it's had on children I taught who are now approaching middle age. So there is a project being undertaken by Mark Williams, and again, Mark proved the science of mindfulness in the health service, and he, over the past 4 or 5 years, has been trying to work on a similar project for mindfulness in education. And he has approached the Wellcome Trust, which after the Gates Foundation is the second biggest donor for scientific research in the world. And it took him and they don't give this money lightly. You've almost got to prove what you're trying to prove before you get the grant. So he's been in dialogue with the Wellcome Trust for about 4 or 5 years. And 2 years ago, they agreed to give him £7 million to do the research on the impact of mindfulness on young people from 11 to 18. And this research involves 25,000 pupils across the UK. Half of them. And when the schools volunteered, they didn't know if they were going to be in the half that received mindfulness and the half that didn't. But they had to undertake from the very outset that if they were selected and they weren't successful in receiving the mindfulness, they weren't allowed to introduce mindfulness for the next 3 years. So I think we're about 18 months into this trial now, and I hope that when Myriad does report, that it will prove conclusively the benefits of mindfulness. And I think that could change educational curriculum around the world. We're all aware and we all support reading, writing and arithmetic. But that's not enough. That's not the whole person. That's about that much of the person. And I think mindfulness can cover the whole person. And it can give the ability to improve reading, writing and arithmetic. We saw yesterday from Saki, no, it wasn't Saki, it was Lena at the back there, the soft skills that that employers want. Now, I honestly believe that in 2 or 3 years' time we will see a shift. Once that Myriad project reports, we will see a shift in the way education is taught around the world. In fact, can I just say, I've got another 2 slides. Can I just continue these 2 slides and then continue? I thought it was a 1 hour lecture yesterday, and then at 4 o'clock I saw it was a 2 hour. So I rushed home and altered my slides. So if I could just continue just for a couple more slides. I dealt with the personal practice that mindfulness gave me and other MPs. And Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. So those MPs, and I think there were about 60 or 70 over an 18-month period, had mindfulness. We then asked them, do you want to take this mindfulness, this gift that you've had, do you want to spread it to your constituents, to your country, by establishing a parliamentary inquiry into mindfulness, into the uses of mindfulness. And when they were presented with the statistics, when they were presented with the global picture, many of those MPs and lords answered the call and said, yes, we do. Now this is the World Health Organization and their prediction that by 2030, depression will be the biggest health burden in the world. Bigger than heart, bigger than cancer. And the word burden isn't a pejorative term. It is the burden on the individual, the burden on his family or her family, and the burden on the society and the economy through absenteeism, presenteeism, not paying taxes. So the impact of depression will be the biggest health burden in the whole of the world in 2030. And we're getting there. It's a tsunami of mental ill health which is sweeping over us. And I think it's sweeping over the anglicised world more than anywhere else at the moment. And when I had formal mindfulness teaching, and I sought to be the change I wanted to see, I started to put down parliamentary questions, written parliamentary questions, in the British Parliament. And some of the answers that came back were really worrying. Education has been mentioned. I put down a question asking, what is the incidence of mental ill health in each 10-year cohort from the age of 15? 15 to 25, 25 to 35, 35. And the answer came back that between 15 and 25 in the United Kingdom, 32.3% of young people in that cohort, in that group, had one or more psychiatric condition. 32.3. I mentioned this in a conference in America 18 months ago. About 15 months ago in Washington. And when I mentioned it, American educators told me it was 42.3 in America. Now, what happens when that gets to 50%? When abnormal becomes normal? These are tremendous pressures that are coming, that are affecting our children. I also put down a question of the incidence of mental ill health in prisons. 85% of prisoners in the UK have got one or more psychiatric condition. That's when they go in. When they come out, it's even higher. And we placate those prisoners in the main with chemical koshes to quieten them down. Now, in the UK, another statistic, I asked for the incidence, for the number of prescriptions that were prescribed for antidepressants in 1991 and in 2011. In 1991 in the United Kingdom, there were 9 million prescriptions written for antidepressants. 20 years later, that had gone up to 49 million prescriptions. It is now 65 million prescriptions a year that are written for antidepressants. That's a huge, massive increase over a 25-year period. In the middle of that period, Mark Williams developed mindfulness, MBCT, to treat the worst type of depression. And the take-up from that is minimal. So we looked at this in our parliamentary inquiry, and our Mindful Nation report, and this is the report. There's a physical copy of the book here. And this book was based on 8 evidence gathering sessions, and it covers criminal justice, education, the workplace, and the health service. And we took evidence in the oak-panelled rooms of Parliament from 80 different witnesses, most of them from the UK, 1 or 2, like Charles Halpern from Berkeley, from outside of the United Kingdom, Chris Tamjidi from Germany. We took evidence from 80 people in 8 evidence sessions. We had, this is Tim Lawton, the chap at the microphone, a Conservative These were chaired by a Conservative, a Liberal, a Labour MP. And we had a launch of the Mindful Nation document, our research, and I have to give praise to Chris Cullen, and the woman on the left there is Madeleine Bunting, because Chris Cullen and Madeleine Bunting set up the Mindfulness Initiative, which supports MPs in Parliament. They set that up about 3 years ago, both of them inspirational mindfulness leaders. With the support of 30 academics, scientists, teachers, prison officers, police officers who practice mindfulness, we were able to bring this document about. 8 evidence sessions, 80 people giving evidence, and in the back there are 250 references. And most of these are scientific references. And if you go in online, you can ping into the reference and it gives you a full account of the science behind it. But it's not just filled with facts and figures and statistics, it's filled with the personal testimony of different people. This was a lad, a prisoner, who was abused by his own father at the age of 5 and traumatised and responded with violence until he discovered mindfulness in prisons. There were police officers, and then we've got prison officers in here. We've got police officers that arrested probably this man. We've got people who work in the judiciary, people who tried this man, and the people who looked after him when he came out of jail. We've got teachers and pupils in here. And it's those personal testimonies that bring this document alive. And it's been recognised, and people have recognised it as a good, well-researched document around the world. And in this report, we asked for achievable things from the government, small requests. And I'm pleased to say I'm a Labour politician. And these have been delivered by a Conservative government. And again, it shows that cross-party support. We asked for an extra 300 MBCT teachers to be trained in the National Health Service, and we ended up with 400 teachers who were going to be trained over 1 year. And there was a pushback. They said they don't need 2 weeks on a retreat. And Willem Kijken said they absolutely do need 2 weeks on a retreat. He argued for the best training for MBC teachers, and he got that. We asked for the government to set up a criminal justice committee to review mindfulness in the criminal justice in the prisons, in the probationary service. They agreed. We thought that mindfulness was being taught in 6 prisons. When this committee got together, they found out it was 32 prisons in the United Kingdom. And that's probably because they wanted to keep it below the radar in case the right-wing press got hold of it and said that these prisoners are getting it too cushy. But if you think, what do you do with a prisoner? Do you pump him up full of antidepressants and then send him out again? Or do you teach him the way to regulate his emotions, to regulate his or her anger? And there's been no backlash against this. And that committee is doing a great job. We've seen success in the private sector. And we've kept up the pressure. Pressure's the wrong word. We've kept up it is pressure, on government to deliver on this. A year ago, Professor Mark Williams gave a briefing to 30 MPs about the science of mindfulness. We also had Ruby Wax. She's the lady in pink on the left. She's a US and a UK comedian who suffered with tremendous mental ill health and gave up her career as a comedian to focus on mindfulness. She did a master's degree in Oxford University, and she's written a book called Frazzled, which is a #1 bestseller. So she has helped popularise mindfulness in the UK in a light-hearted way, in a non-stigmatised way. So we've held a meeting in Parliament to maintain the interest of those politicians. 2 weeks ago, we had the second a 2-year review of Mindful Nation. And this is where I get these statistics from, about the 400 MBCT trainers, about this steering committee for criminal justice. We had this review in Parliament. We've also been working with a follow-up publication, building the case for mindfulness in the workplace. And we've been working with some of the top companies in the UK. Jaguar Land Rover have taught mindfulness or introduced mindfulness to 2,500 of their 45,000 staff in the United Kingdom. Ernst & Young let us launch the document from their big tall sky tower in Canary Wharf. So we're cooperating with the private sector. And I mentioned the Myriad project before. So these are all ways that we've come together as politicians to take mindfulness forward in government, in Parliament, and in society. And what's been done in the United Kingdom can be done elsewhere. And I don't want to say we only know it's only in the United Kingdom, because in the second half of my speech, after the toilet break, I want to celebrate some of the successes that are in other areas of the world. But this is our small offering from the UK, a Mindful Nation report, and I hope it can be done. As has been said by Mark over there, this can be done in Denmark and in every other country in the world. And over the past 6 or 7 years, mindfulness has become part of the zeitgeist, or the zeitgeist has improved. It's found resonance in areas where you wouldn't have thought it had found resonance. I think in 2011, John Kabat-Zinn was asked to go and address the World Economic Forum. These are the captains of the universe, the people that control the banks and our economies. Even they realised, probably 3 years after the crash, that something was wrong in the heart of international finance. Something was wrong in the economies of the Western world. And they sought some advice on that. And John Kabat-Zinn went there. I think he went for 2 or 3 times on the trot. I think they've had the Dalai Lama there and Matthew Ricard. So they're open to listening to the mindfulness perspective. We've also seen mindfulness taking off in companies around the world. And some of the most creative companies the world has ever known are using mindfulness. Google and Apple, YouTube. So mindfulness is making big strides in business. Mindfulness is making big strides in the university sector. You notice I've put Aarhus in there. And I'm sorry that Christine Parsons has gone, because Galway's in there as well. Galway University is just trying to establish mindfulness research. Galway University that has a free lectures for faculty, staff and the general public on mindfulness on a Monday afternoon, on a Wednesday lunchtime and on a Friday evening, opening up the university to mindfulness for the whole of the community. So the universities are at the fore of mindfulness. And the slide that was shown yesterday about the research, how it's massively increased in universities around the world. Mindfulness is out there in the media. It's out there on the front page of Time. Mindful magazine by Jim Gimmion, an excellent publication. It's become popularised by the likes of Ariana Huffington with her book Thrive, which she launched from 11 Downing Street 3 years ago. I was invited along to the launch. I took her to Parliament. Again, popular people like Ariana Huffington and the Huffington Post have done much to get mindfulness across to a non-academic, not to the academics, to the scientists, but just to ordinary people. We've also seen mindfulness, or the issue of well-being, taking off around the world. And as I say, I'm a Labour politician, I'm on the left, but there's 2 men there, Sarkozy and David Cameron, 2 men on the right, who decided that the measurement of a nation's success should not just be GDP, gross domestic product. That was invented as a measurement of success in the 1930s after the Great Depression. And the person that helped to engineer it, John Maynard Keynes, was distraught when he saw that years later, that was the only measurement of economic success. And two politicians from the right decided that they would measure well-being within their country. I think France started in 2010, and the United Kingdom started in 2011. So now the Office for National Statistics in the United Kingdom measures well-being. The man on the right is Sir Gus O'Donnell, G-O-D, God. And he was the top civil servant under Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and David Cameron. He retired early, I think in his late 50s. And he looked back at his illustrious career and said, I've got another 10 or 15 years work left in me. What do I want to concentrate on? And he looked around, because he'd been in all departments, and he decided he was going to take on the issue of well-being. And he worked with David Cameron and Professor Richard Layard, he keeps on popping up, to establish the Centre for What Works in Wellbeing, that analyses research from around the world and public policy from around the world, and looks at the science and makes recommendations. So civil servants, politicians are taking the issue of well-being very seriously. I want to come on to some of the inspirational people I've met since I've been interested in mindfulness, because it's not just a UK thing. And John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santarello, fantastic work over a 40-year period in Massachusetts. You know, that's the epicenter of mindfulness in the West. But it's not just there. It's not just in the UK. There are individuals who have acted as catalysts for mindfulness around the world. Now, I explained that I lost my job in Parliament 2 years ago, in 2015, and I regained my position as an MP 3 months ago because the Conservative Prime Minister, Theresa May, decided to call a snap election, and I was on a plane with my wife to Toronto to go to a conference. My bags were on the plane, and me and my wife were having a cup of coffee when the news came on, snap election. And Labour were 20 points behind in the polls, but I still decided to put my name forward, and over 7 weeks we went from 20 to 1 percentage point behind in the polls, and they ended up getting back in Parliament. But for that 2-year period when I was not in Parliament, for 18 months of that I was unemployed, but I had a I'm not complaining, I had a redundancy package which was from Parliament, and I used that to go and visit parliaments. I've been asked by a number of countries, or advocates in a number of countries, to visit their parliament or and to come across and to see if I could help mindfulness get established. And one of the first ones I did was in Australia, and I spoke at a Mindful Life conference, I think, and whilst I was there, that was in Sydney, they paid for me to go to Melbourne and meet this inspirational man, Craig Hassed. He's an associate professor in Monash University. He established mindfulness in the medical department of Monash University in 1991. When they were sending their medical interns out to the hospitals, between 50 and 75% of them had clinical stress, anxiety, or depression. These were the people that were going to, the future GPs, the future surgeons of Australia. So Craig decided to introduce mindfulness to those people. And he kept the statistics, and the statistic proved that those conditions came down rapidly. It was such a success, he rolled it out to 12 other departments in Monash University. And he's kept the statistics over those years. And I met him, and I asked him to come to the House of Commons, which he did a year last June. And he was so good, he came back again this June with John Kabat-Zinn for a conference on mindfulness in the universities, in the UK universities. An inspirational man. This man in the middle there is Cesar Daniel Madruga. He and his father were politicians in Mexico. He's a big environmentalist. Over the past 2 years, if I haven't met people in person, I've Skyped dozens of people, and he is a very impressive person. In 2012, he got a Tibetan monk to come to the Mexican Parliament and introduce mindfulness to the whole of the Parliament. Just one session. And people were switched on. And as a result of that, they had pilot projects on mindfulness in the police, the Navy, and the prison service in Mexico. An inspirational man. This is Marcelo De Marzo. When I lost my position as an MP in 2015, I was asked to go on Oxford University's Mindfulness Board, the OMC, and also Bangor University's. And those two centres, great training grounds, people would come from around the world for summer schools, and the university would say, oh, you're interested in mindfulness in politics? Meet with Chris Ruane. So I was able to Skype with Marcelo. Marcelo organises conferences, mindfulness conferences with Javier Capello from Spain. The two of them organised conferences on a continental scale in South America one year and Spain the following year. And Marcelo introduced me to dozens of mindfulness advocates across South America, and there's fantastic things going on out there. This is a German man I came across when we were doing the Mindful Nation report in 2014. This is Chris Tamjidi. He is Iranian-Austrian, and he teaches mindfulness to German engineering companies. You know, the Germans like to measure things. He will go in there and say, I can measure heart rate, blood pressure, sleep patterns, absenteeism, presenteeism, a whole range of things to these companies. And I will measure them at the beginning, and I will measure them at the end, and I will show the benefit of mindfulness to your organisation. And when he has success in one, he goes to another. And he is doing inspirational work. He has been out with Richard Rioch, a Buddhist practitioner in the UK, to the King's University in Morocco, and has taught Moroccan deans, 12 deans in that university, mindfulness. And these are from a Muslim country who are open-minded about mindfulness. He's also been out to teach, well, in fact, I'll come across it in a moment because it's a separate one. This is Freddie Ehlers from Ecuador, an Ecuadorian minister that I met in the United Arab Emirates in February. A great man. He practices mindfulness. He is the Minister for Good Living. Could you imagine having that in Denmark or the UK? A Minister for Good Living. And a great man. He's introduced mindfulness into the schools in Ecuador. This is Joaquim Alberto Chisano. He was involved in the Mozambican civil war in the late 1980s and early 90s. He was a meditator. It wasn't mindfulness, it was TM. But when he was on the victorious side, and those civil wars, well, civil wars anywhere can be very vicious, but it was particularly vicious in Mozambique. And at the end of that war, he was victorious. And he didn't come chasing after the people he beat. He brought them into government. He introduced mindfulness to the army and the police force. And it went from a position of war to a position of peace on a very gentle gradient. This is Leo Varadkar. He is the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, and he is a mindfulness practitioner. This shows, I think, Syrian refugees coming across the border into, I think it's the Lebanon. And there's a woman I met at Bangor University called Juditha Ben David. She is an Israeli Jewess, and she is translating mindfulness into Arabic to help with those children and those adults, those displaced people who have seen terrible, terrible things in Syria, who have come across the border, who are highly stressed, and she is using mindfulness to help them overcome. Another inspirational person, you might recognize her, and there are many in Northern Europe. People who go quietly about their business in mindfulness, acting as catalysts, having conferences, commissioning research, travelling, spreading their wisdom. And Lone is one of them, as you all know. And John Kabat-Zinn. I couldn't miss my list of inspirational people without including John Kabat-Zinn. And again, I've mentioned the stuff that we've done in the United Kingdom Parliament, but I don't want, it's not the British Empire, it's not rule Britannia. There is best practice around the world. We went the first Parliament to adopt, in the West, to adopt mindfulness. That was the Swedish Parliament, just over the bridge. And again, inspirational people. A female Swedish MP, again on the right, Anne-Marie Broden, who established mindfulness in the Swedish Parliament in 2012, with a great advocate, and behind every politician that introduces it, there are always great advocates pulling the strings. And it's Chris Cullen and Mark Williams with me, not pulling my strings, but advising me and helping me and keeping me on the straight and narrow and slowing me down. And in Sweden, it was Gunnar Mechanik. And if you do want to take mindfulness forward in Denmark, perhaps he would be the logical person to help you. But the Swedish Parliament established mindfulness in 2012. Tim Ryan, Congressman Tim Ryan, he established mindfulness on Capitol Hill in 2012, I think in June 2012. Now, in the United Kingdom, we are very straight-laced. So when we introduced mindfulness, we didn't do any mindful movement to start off with, and certainly no mindful walking around Parliament. We didn't even lie down for the body scan because we were in a committee room, an oak-panelled committee room on heavy oak chairs, and we simply sat and meditated and listened to pearls of wisdom from Chris Cullen. Now here's a man who proudly sits in the lotus position and has his photograph taken. That's his office. Been fortunate enough to meet him in his office. He set up that practice. He tried it on a cross-party basis. In the main, it's Democrats and independents. He is reaching out to Republicans to see if they can meditate together. I went to see Tim Ryan 18 months ago, and I was speaking at a conference there, and we were already working on an idea for a European conference, and he said, why not go global? Why not have an international conference of politicians who meditate? I told him about the countries that we'd already made contact with, bring them together. And that's what we're doing. I'll come to that later on. But he, again, an inspirational politician who has taken mindfulness to the heart of American democracy. Whilst I was a member of Parliament, I was asked to go and speak at the Google conference in Dublin. It was the first time that Google had held their conference. It was Wisdom 2.0. It was the first time that they held their conference outside of the US, and it was in Google's headquarters in Dublin. And I spoke there whilst I was an MP, and there were 300 people in the audience from 69 different countries. And after I spoke, people asked, will you come to my country? Will you come to my country? I said, hold on, I've got an election next year. So I helped in 3 countries, and Holland was one of them. And again, I mentioned the inspiration of Lone in Denmark. The woman with short hair in the middle is Anne Specken, and the man next to her is Rob Brandsma, and they are 2 academics in Holland. They asked me, they invited me to Parliament, but the catalyst for this visit is the young man in an open-top shirt. And he was only about 24, 25, and he'd read about the stuff that I'd done in the British Parliament and approached me, and then he went to a Dutch think tank and said, what do you think about this? And they backed it, and they contacted Anna and Rob and myself and Tracy Crouch. She's the woman with long hair in the middle. We went over there, and that's Tracy addressing Dutch MPs. And of the 150 MPs in the Dutch Parliament, 22 of them received mindfulness training in a 6-month period. You know, it was a phenomenal hit. One of the things they did not do in the Dutch Parliament was form a policy committee or a cross-party group. And that wasn't kept up. And when we've examined what's gone on in other parliaments, we've drawn up a blueprint of what we think should be done in trying to introduce mindfulness to a parliament, and I'll come on to that afterwards. This man is a conservative. Again, he's on the right. In fact, he's quite right, right on the right. And he approached me in a conference in Dublin and said, "Chris, what's this mindfulness about?" So I explained. And John Kabat-Zinn was coming over to Chester to Bangor University's conference. I said, well, John Kabat-Zinn is coming over in 6 weeks' time. He can explain it much better than me. So they rolled out the red carpet for Darren Miller, Conservative, and he sat down with John Kabat-Zinn, and he was determined to go and establish mindfulness in the Welsh Assembly. So in one lesson, 6 Assembly members out of 60, 10% of that assembly received mindfulness because of Darren Miller. When I was, the first parliament I went to after I lost my seat in 2015 was in Australia. And it's quite a tough politics out there, you know, Bruce and Sheila, you know, they slap each other about a bit. And I went over there, and 18 MPs were interested, and I met with 12 of them. But it was just before the Australian election. So they were going to do it afterwards, but then it dissipated. You need that focus to keep up that momentum, that interest with politicians. Between June and June last year and Christmas, I went over 3 times to the French Parliament, to the National Assembly, and I worked with some wonderful people over there. And the 3 women on the left, the woman in the middle is Genevieve Hamelin, and she's in charge of the it's the organisation that looks after mindfulness in France. And next to her is Audrey Burt. She worked in the British Embassy. She got the British ambassador to open up the British Embassy to a Labour MP 2 days before the Brexit vote. And the ambassador said, you can come in, you can mention mindfulness, but don't mention Brexit. Or I'll lose my job. And I honoured that. And I spoke to French MPs. I went out there another 2 times, and they're just about to start mindfulness in the French Assembly. And the man on the right, Yves Le Bihan, another tremendous figure who organises conferences on for French companies. And the 3 of them, 3 different people who didn't know each other, came together, forgot their egos, worked together from 3 different branches for the common purpose of introducing mindfulness to the National Assembly in France. I mentioned Chris Tamjidi and the work he did in Morocco. He also, Oxford University Mindfulness Centre, were commissioned by the United Arab Emirates Prime Minister to teach mindfulness to 200 members of the Prime Minister's staff. So Willem Kijken from Oxford, Maura Kenny from Australia, and Chris Tamjidi from Germany went out and taught mindfulness to the Prime Minister's staff. And the woman the woman second from the right, I mentioned the Minister for Good Living in Ecuador. This is the Minister for Happiness. This is an Arab country, and they've chosen a woman to be the Minister for Happiness. I went over to a conference there in February, and Martin Seligman was the father of positive psychology. He gave a lecture, and he said, he pointed to the fact that the Medicis in Florence in the 1500s, they had massive wealth because of trade. And usually when a city or a region got massive wealth, they went to war. But the Medicis decided not to do that. They decided to fund and patronise the arts, and which led to the Renaissance. And he compared to what the UAE are doing now on happiness and well-being and mindfulness as a good example of a nation using its wealth, not for the traditional means to expand itself or to conquer other nations, but to spread well-being. Now, there are many faults in many countries, my own and in the UAE, but I believe this is a good indication of and good policy to invest, to establish a minister for happiness and to invest in mindfulness at the heart of decision-making. This is, I mentioned that Ruane suggested having this international conference. It was planned for last June, but in the UK Parliament, but the Prime Minister called a snap election, thank God, and we postponed bringing in these politicians until October the 17th. And John Kabat-Zinn honoured it, came over in June to speak to advocates, mindfulness advocates, but there weren't many politicians. He is flying in for the day on October the 17th to speak with politicians, 17 politicians from 10 different countries around the world, and also 25 British MPs about mindfulness in politics. And this is great news, and we hope that those MPs will get to know each other, to personally get to know each other, and take mindfulness back to their parliaments, if they haven't already established them. And to spot best practice, wherever that may be, if it's in Monash University in Australia, for those politicians to say to their university minister, why don't we have a look at the research that's going on in Monash? To say, the British Health Service have had mindfulness for repeat episode depression for 13 years, and it's been proven. Why don't we ask our select committee to have a look at the work that they've been doing? The work that's been done in American jails. Why don't we have a look at that work, and to see if we can leverage up best practice from around the world? Because you can have all of the science, copper-bottomed or not, randomized control tests, you can have it and present it, and sometimes it just gathers dust on the shelf. It's that interface of politics, policy, research and science that I believe politicians can play a key role in. And we're hoping this historic meeting on October the 17th will result in great things flowing from that, and it'll be great if we can get a Danish representative there. Now, chance, serendipity, Fortuna's wheel have played a great part in taking mindfulness forward from my perspective. I've met different people on a Skype, I've spoken to them, and they've said, have you heard about this person over here? And that cross-fertilization across continents has taken place. If I can just tell you the story behind this picture. I mentioned that we are having our 2-year review of the Mindful Nation report 2 weeks ago, and we booked a room in Parliament for 70 people, and people were flying in, some of them were coming from California, and they were flying in for 70 people. The day before, the parliamentary authority said, you can no longer have that room, a select committee needs it, you can have this room over here for 35 people. So I had to go and have a look at this room. I thought there's only 26 chairs. So I went to see the lady on the committee corridor. I said, we've been bumped from 75 to 35, there's only 26 chairs. She says, that's terrible. And because I was present for her, because I laughed and smiled and had a joke with her, she said, have you tried the Interparliamentary Union? They've got a big room which is never used. I'll ring them for you. So she rang up and she said, Chris Ruane MP wants to have a word. And I rang and I spoke to them. They said, yes, you can have the room, but there's we need it until 12:15 because there's a Mexican senator coming over. I said, well, that's good. I'm trying to introduce mindfulness to the Mexican Parliament. Could I meet her? So they arranged for a meeting with Senator Cuevas, and she's one of 2 women from South America who want to be the head of the Interparliamentary Union. Now, the Interparliamentary Union is like the club for all the democracies in the world. There's 160 members. So I was sat next to her and I said about mindfulness, and her eyes lit up. She said, let me recommend some books to you. I thought, I'm on the right track here. And here's some names of some other senators in Mexico who will be interested in mindfulness. So I thought I'll push it a little bit further. I said, if you are elected as the head of the IPU for the next 4 years, would you consider holding an international conference for 160 countries? And she said she would. So I am now going to go to the other candidate from Uruguay and ask her the same. So I'm hedging my bets, and I'm hoping that we can have an international conference of 160 countries from around the world to look at mindfulness. And I'll leave you with this. And Saki Santarello, I think he showed pictures of the world numerous times yesterday and asked us to reflect on it. Now, he had America on his side of the globe. I put you noticed it, I put Africa and the Middle East on my side, and I think, God, Europe's under cloud again. But it almost feels as though the world, the earth, is crying out when we see the storms, the tempests, the hurricanes, the droughts, the big freezes, the floods. It almost seems like Gaia, a living organism, is saying, oh, I can't cope. We've got leaders who haven't developed their interior, who are quite satisfied with a hard exterior. Leaders like Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, literally have the world in their hands. They could start a new nuclear war. And I think mindfulness, at this point in history, has got a definite role in softening the hearts of politicians, opening the minds of politicians, to make sure that we don't destroy the planet through climate change or through nuclear war, accidental or on purpose, and that we need those leaders to have the empathy, the compassion and the wisdom and the discernment to protect their own countries, but the whole of the planet. But it shouldn't be just left to politicians. Tim Ryan wrote an excellent book called Mindful Nation, and it was about mindfulness in the prisons, mindfulness in education, mindfulness in the health service. And at the end of every chapter, he said, here are 8 things that you could do. If you are a parent, write to your school, write to your teachers' union, write to your local governor. Tell them about your passion. Tell them about your concern to make sure, and ask them what are they going to do about it. And I think that's the right way to go forward. Don't just leave it to your politicians. You as individuals, there are catalysts in this room here today. Some bigger catalysts than others. But we are all catalysts. The reason you've come here today is because you have a passion for mindfulness. You may work in mindfulness. You can see the benefits personally, or within your family, or within your country, or within the world. And I ask you as Danish citizens, do you know your local MP? Have you ever met your local MP? Have you expressed your passion about mindfulness? Have you pointed out the problems in Danish society through mental ill health or lack of flourishing? And you're one of the blessed societies. You've got hygge, is it? You know how to sit round together. You know the dangers of the internet. You know the dangers of overworking. You know the dangers of advertising. You appreciate community. But you still have issues. Have you communicated your concern to your politicians? And I think if you all did that, I'm not sure how many Danish MPs there are. Anybody know? 179. Okay, well, I'm sure there are many people from Aarhus, but also from beyond here today. If you were to have a one-to-one with your politician to express what you feel, because he will probably be, or she will probably be feeling the same. So, I want to leave you on that note. I just want 1 minute reflection on looking at that world and seeing what we can do as individuals to help to preserve it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I am humbled. There is 25 minutes left. If anybody, I messed up at the questioning at the end of the first session. So we'll take questions from the first session and the second session together. But if you can bear in mind what I said, that we will be having a panel discussion for 1 hour about introducing mindfulness into Danish politics and society. So I'll answer some short questions on that, but if you can bear that in mind. Yes?
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. If we should learn from your experiences, what should we do different? What should we do that you have experienced by making this journey in trying to incorporate mindfulness in everyday life, in Parliament and in other educational places?
Okay. In fact, I did say that I would touch on that. We had our experience in introducing mindfulness in the British Parliament, and I helped with the German, French, Dutch and Welsh Assembly. And last year, whilst I was on my enforced sabbatical, I rang up the advocates in those different countries and said, "You've introduced it, what would you do better next time?" And we came up with a bit of a blueprint document, which I can share with Lone and others if you want to take that forward. So one of the first things is to map out the mindfulness in your country, to see what strengths you have. If you're taking it to a politician, then, and you say, in Denmark we're doing this, in Denmark we're doing that, they get, rightly or wrongly, national pride, national ego. Politicians like me and others like to be stroked. You know, you're doing well, which you are doing well in Denmark. So map out what's going on in your own country. Map out what's going on centres of excellence around the world, and I've touched upon a few of those already. Pick out the best teacher. Oh, sorry. First of all, cooperate with a prestigious university in your own country, and if you haven't, which you have got, and if not in your own country, in other countries, in your region or beyond. Pick the best teacher in your country, most inspirational teacher, and we were very fortunate with having Mark Williams and Chris Cullen, and Chris Cullen has hung on in there for 5 years now. And I know it's terrible, but if you charge for those lessons, some MPs will not come. What they've done in the United Kingdom is invite people to come along, and some stay for 1 lesson or 2 lessons, and some stay for the 8 lessons, and at the end of that we tell them the cost, and we make them ask them to make a donation to the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. So by making it free, you cast your net wider, and hopefully by the end of that 8 weeks you've touched their soul and opened their pockets. And so making it free. To stress the science behind this. In some countries, religion in public life is illegal. So in America, they are not allowed to take religion into state schools, or into, I think they call it public schools over there. You can have Catholic schools, you can have Jewish schools and Muslim schools, but the state schools goes right back to the Constitution there's no crossover. In French schools, it's the same. And I think you're on safer ground, leading with the science. Now, some from the contemplative traditions get upset about this. I think the Dalai Lama said, do what's necessary. We recognize the Eastern traditions, but not just the Eastern traditions. I'm a Roman Catholic, and it's in our church. It's in Jewish, Muslim churches, Muslim religions. So we recognize the religion, but we lead with the science. We've had to modify the course to suit MPs' busy timetables. So it was MBC2L, it's Peace in a Frantic World. We cut it down from a 2.5-hour lesson to a 1.25-hour lesson. We chose the timing at the end of the day on a Tuesday at 7 o'clock or 7:15 after the last vote for an hour and a quarter. We decided not to do the mindful movement and the mindful walking. We decided because we felt some MPs would not like to be doing that in front of MPs from another party. So we dropped that. No incense, a few gongs. So we modified that. We went forward on a cross-party basis. We had follow-up lessons. We realised that in some parliaments, fantastic introduction, but without that follow-up lesson over the years, it can fade off. We introduced mindfulness in policy. So some people were excited because of what it did to them. Others came along and wanted to develop mindfulness policy. They enjoyed it, but they wanted it to come from a policy perspective. We pitched it so it wasn't seen as clinical. I didn't go around and say, well, you've had a nervous breakdown, you're going mad. Come along here, you'll be all right. I pitched it. If I saw that somebody was in trouble, I would pitch it to them like that. But for others, I tried to pitch it as something that will flourish, that will liberate them, that will help them as an individual, as a parent or a spouse, as a politician. Tracy Crouch, who was the Conservative co-chair, spoke publicly about when she got up in a chamber, before she got up in the chamber to speak, she would take her shoes off, ground herself, then stand up, feel connected, and then project herself. And she said it worked well until one of the whips, one of the enforcers in her Conservative Party, noticed the camera on her feet, and they texted her, "Get your shoes back on." But she kept them off. So it can enhance your professional performance. So those are just a few of the things in our blueprint document after listening to the introduction in different countries. And I must stress that that's only a suggestion, because each country will be different. Each country's got a different history, a different religion, different societal norms, different politics. So these are just suggestions. It might work for you, it might not. So those are some of the modifications we've made.
Hello, I'm researcher and associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. Thank you for some great talks. I want to go back to the first talk you had today, and this is a comment and a question, because you touched upon the bell curve. You said something like that this may not work for everybody, but if it works for 20 or 30, 50%, then you may have the chance to switch the normal distribution of mental health problems toward more health, less problems. And I just want to emphasize that this is really a very, very strong argument, because according to Rose's strategy from prevention, that is how you really create more health. It's not by just focuses on the ones who has already problems, but if you can gain more health for the many around the mean, then you really prevent problems also in the severe end. So that's my comment. Thank you very much for mentioning the bell curve. It's a strong argument. Now my question is this: how on earth do you explain that for the politicians? Because it's a bit, you have to be familiar with the idea of a normal distribution and of mental health problems being on a continuum. It's not black and white, it's on a continuous, dimensional. So how do you explain that argument when you meet politicians?
Well, I suppose one way I could do it is say, here's the bell curve. Where are you as a politician? And here's the bell curve. There's the line with those suffering, those not so bad, those flourishing. So ask a politician, whereabouts on that bell curve are you? Are you suffering? Are you in the middle? Are you flourishing? And where do you as a politician, do you want to move the bell curve back that way? So you get more misery? Or do you want to move it forward that way? And I think there are issues for politicians. This is where we may lose the consensualness of mindfulness, because you can feel the immediate effect of mindfulness. You can put it forward in the health service, in the education service, and most people wouldn't argue about that. In the prison service, some might argue about that. Being nice to prisoners is awful, but the general outcome is that they're going to be better when they leave. But I think with the opening, with mindfulness and the opening of the heart and the mind, bigger questions need to be asked. You know, what is it in the United Kingdom society that is turning 32.3% of young people between 15 and 25 to have one or more psychiatric condition? You know, we can give them drugs to cope with it, we can give them mindfulness to cope with it, but those pressures will still be there. And there's much argument and discussion and debate and some research into why that is the case. There's an excellent book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, and he does a survey of American society and volunteering and community, and he looks at it over a 40-year period and how that diminishes, how that social cement that bonded us together has become fragmented. It's a big, thick book, but in essence, he said two of the biggest causes are commuting for 3 hours a day and watching TV. There are other reasons as well. But if you're commuting, society's commuting and wasting 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, when they get home, they go into their house, the drawbridge comes up, the family are together, and quite often the family go off to different rooms to watch different devices. So we become an atomized society. Some, like Oliver James, in his book Affluenza, maintains that it is advertising, that the purpose of an advert is to make you unhappy with what you've got so that you'll go and buy something else. And to be bombarded with tens of thousands of adverts a week making you unhappy will make you as an individual and your society unhappy. And he's correlated the amount of GDP spent in America, and I think it's about 1.5% on adverts, and they have mental health rates like this. In the UK, it's about 1%, and they have mental health rates like this. And in mainland Europe, I think it's 0.6%, and they have mental health rates like this. So is it advertising? And it's lots of references being made to digital distraction. You know, if I'm staring at a screen all day, and I'm not sure what the figures are for Denmark, in some countries it's 4 or 5 hours a day. So instead of staring into somebody's face, reading the social and emotional cues from all those little muscles in the face, I'm looking at a screen, and I'm missing out 5 hours a day on that. Well, that's a lot of tutorial in one day, a lot of practical work in one day that you're missing out on. Digital information overload. You know, the amount of information that we're trying to take into our minds. Is it the way that we organise our economy? Is it that we've got social mobility, geographical mobility? You know, the average American in 1974, their wage rates haven't increased over a 40-year period. There are two reasons for the increase in household income. One is because the spouse is going out to work, and the other, according to Richard Reich, who was Clinton's Labour minister, is that people are working longer hours in America. I think it's something like 350 hours extra a year. Now, a French working week is 35 hours a week. So to be working the equivalent of 10 extra weeks in a year, is it, so it's lots of these possible causes, but I believe if a politician is awakened, they will look at the whole range. And politicians on the right are already saying, for well-being, we want to measure well-being as well. And I think it will give them greater scope, and from a personal position of balance, to give them greater wisdom to make things better in their society and better in the world. Yeah. Any other questions? I think we got about 10 minutes.
Thank you for a very inspirational speech. We have a problem when we talk about measuring well-being related to the fact that we've always done that in political contexts. So when we talk about well-being at work, it's typically when you have a stress policy to be made, or you have a well-being policy to be made, and so on. And then that means a lot of people are, in a way, indoctrinated into thinking about well-being as a political, negotiable topic, where indeed it's a health issue. What do you think about that? The possibility of having this as a non-political issue, actually, a health policy issue or a health issue that's still interesting for politicians, even though they don't differ much once they start to look at it as a health issue. That's a problem we often talk about here, because if you have, you're a politician, you want to have influence, you want to make your mark, you want to be edgy, clear, visible. There's not much visibility in something that everybody agrees on. And once it becomes a health issue, everybody agrees on it. So how do you deal with that? How do you make it interesting for politicians to join this, even though there's no politician specialty to market you?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there about in the workplace, it's something we have to be very careful about. Some on the left have said that posed the question, is mindfulness the new opium of the masses? Are you introducing it in the workplace just so those workers can work harder? They go around faster on that treadmill. Now, I don't believe that. I believe it can be used for that. But I believe that if you've had mindfulness, and especially if you've had mindfulness throughout your organisation, that if you are a senior manager and you've been touched by mindfulness, you're going to be more aware of the people that you're managing, and then their needs, wants and aspirations. But it's something that we have to be careful of, and we have to watch that. And I think as a politician should be interested in all aspects of his country's life or her country's life: health, educational, criminal justice, the workplace.
Just follow, be a bit more specific. We did this big study on well-being on all Danish teachers, all Danish pupils for the last couple of years. And yesterday we were speaking about 25,000 pupils who were not having any good connection with the teachers and having no friends at school, thus being stressed continually and having nobody to talk to in that relationship. And so we're looking at the teachers say, the teacher unions say, representatives of them, why don't you measure teacher well-being? Because our well-being obviously is a precondition for the well-being of the pupils. And the argument is then that one of the reasons it's not being done is that the employees and the employers cannot agree on that. It's a political issue. It's something you negotiate. So we don't look at it. And often, when we, for instance, measure employee well-being, it's viewed as unreliable because they just gang up against their leadership. So the leaders don't want to have that, and that means that the situation is stalled. And it's difficult to get a reliable evidence base on how well people are feeling at the workplace. So that's a current issue we have here. I've been asked by teachers' labor union to see what we can do about it, because it's really a gridlock there, and a lot of teachers are not thriving, and they realize that there are children that are not thriving under their wings, but they're not getting any help, and the political system is blocking the solution. So it seems to me that what we need to do is we need to create a common awareness that health issues, that the issue of well-being is much more a health issue than it's a political issue. But so far, at least for the last 150 years, this has been dealt with as a political issue, indoctrinating everybody to think it's something you negotiate. Like you can negotiate the temperature of the body, but really not.
I'm still in the National Union of Teachers. That's my trade union, even though I've been out teaching for 20 years now. But the National Union of Teachers in Wales has given a 80% discount to its membership to go on mindfulness courses. So instead of costing £250, it's £50. And they've had a big take-up. And I think it's a threat and an opportunity. I'm not sure what your statistics are in Denmark, but in the United Kingdom, my daughter's just finished 4 years training as a teacher, and started 2 weeks ago. But 40% of newly qualified teachers are not teaching 1 year after they finished university. So you can explain it to politicians to say, is this a worthwhile investment for the individual, for the state, to train these thousands, tens of thousands of teachers every year for 40% of them? And quite often they're vocational courses as well, for teaching. Sometimes it's history for 3 years and a postgraduate certificate in education at the end of it. But for many of them, it's a teaching degree, specific vocational. To have 4 years of your life training for that and then not to go into it seems a waste for the individual and a waste for the nation. And a lot of that is down to teacher stress, especially for young teachers. So it can be explained from an economic point of view, from a moral point of view. And the issue also in mindfulness is, with this tsunami of mental ill health that is affecting the whole of the world, and mindfulness being offered as one of the solutions, how do we make sure, if the demand is massive and outstrips the supply of trained teachers, how do we meet that? And I think one of the ways that we need to explore is, should teachers at the age of 18 when they go to university, should they be given mindfulness? And I mentioned Craig Hassad in Monash University. For the medics, it's compulsory. Now, some would argue against that. You know, you can't, like a Strasbourg goose, you can't cram mindfulness down the throat of somebody if they don't want it. Now, how he gets around it over there, 25, 26 years ago, I don't know. But at least it should be offered, so that if you are given an 18-year-old teacher or student who wants to be a teacher in 3 or 4 years' time, if you're giving them 3 or 4 years of mindfulness, then that's 3 or 4 years they can develop that practice. And at the end of it, if they become a teacher, they'll be more stable, less likely to leave the profession, and also go on to touch the minds of tens of thousands of children in their, whatever it is, 40 years, probably by then, 50 or 60-year career, as pension age goes up. And I think that's a way, the scalability is, and the same in health. Doctors go in at 18, coming out at 25. That's 7 years. And it's a highly stressed profession. If we can give those doctors, those prison officers, those teachers, those people in highly stressed positions, that personal stability, which will go on to professional flourishing, I think that might be one of the ways that we could answer that question of supply and demand. I think It's 59, I think that's about it. So once again, thank you. Thank you very much. Are we saying Wales? Diolch yn fawr iawn.